The Utah Utes and Stanford Cardinal face off this Saturday in what should be another exciting Pac-12 showdown. But what are the biggest stories? Who has the edge? And what else intrigues us about this game? We're talking about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube. Appreciate all of you who have helped us reach over 560 subscribers. Love interacting with you guys on the comments as well as on social media at JT Wistrcill or at Locked On Utes 2. Also, today's episode is brought to you by Underdog. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's promo code Locked On, all caps, and there's a space between Locked and On. So Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And joining me today to break down this fun game between Utah and Stanford is Stanford Rivals publisher Ben Parker. Ben, appreciate you joining us today. And this is an interesting matchup just in terms of looking at the biggest stories in this game because, look, the line for Utah is they're favored by 24, so they're expected to win. Stanford coming off a rough game against Washington State. In terms of the biggest storylines, I'll start with Utah. I think for Utah, a lot of people are curious who's going to walk just because it is senior day first. We expect Clark Phillips to underclassmen. I think Cam Rising, and there's a couple other running backs and players that have a lot of people curious about who's going to walk. But as it pertains to the game, I think for Utah fans, it's how does Cam Rising look? Because Cam Rising did not start the game great against Arizona, missed some throws that he usually makes, settled in and made some nice ones, especially to Devon Vele. I don't expect Dalton Kincaid to play, so his main target is not going to be there for another game in this one. But I feel like for Utah, it's making sure Cam looks good, looks ready to go in preparation for that game against Oregon the following week. But Utah's still got to focus on Stanford because Stanford's still a team that, look, they went on the road and got a really good win at Notre Dame, but just at an interesting point right now for their program.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very fair assessment for sure.
How do you look at it for Stanford? What kind of are the biggest stories and things for the Cardinal going into this game that intrigues you?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, probably the biggest thing that intrigues me is just how are they going to navigate this running back situation.
Mhm.
They came into the season with EJ Smith, Emmett Smith's son, as their RB1, and Casey Filkins was the RB2. Those guys were both out. Smith was out for the year since he didn't. I'm trying to even play against USC. He didn't play against USC. He played against Colgate. No, he did play against USC, but like a
Okay.
couple of snaps, and then he was done.
Uh-huh.
And then he missed the Oregon game, but then like somewhere in between that and the Oregon game, they announced that he was done for the year, had surgery, so he's out. And then Casey Filkins got hurt against Arizona State on a late hit out of bounds. And then now they're running back Brendan Barrow is out for this week. Caleb Robinson's out for this week. They're having Mitch Lagbert play running back, who's actually a safety. So our subscribers have been joking that playing running back for Stanford is like being a drummer at Spinal Tap because so many guys keep going down. So
Yep.
I'm very interested to see how they manage the running game, and then also just how much do they throw as well, because they're really going to need to rely on that passing game to do anything. So that's probably the big thing. And then also as well, the other key thing is the defense. The defense has been getting better each week, but last week 4 defensive starters went down in the first drive. Kind of some bad luck there. So there's a lot of injuries and things they're navigating, and it's interesting to see with the weeks of preparation if they can be any better than last week.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting just talking about Stanford, looking at how their season's kind of played out. I mean, you look at it the first week, you get the win versus Colgate, you mentioned. Look, you lose to USC, but you score 28 points. So you're like, okay, this could be something. We know how good Oregon is now after that. Oregon State, a neck and neck game, could have gone either way. But then you get the big win at Notre Dame, follow that up with a win against Arizona State. And sure, you get throttled by UCLA, but that's a top 10 team, even though the committee doesn't feel like it is right now. And then you look at Washington State. What do you think kind of happened, and how would you characterize what's going on with this Stanford team, a team that could go on the road to Notre Dame and get a win there, something we just saw Clemson wasn't able to do, but yet at home against Washington State lets them go for 52 and then only scores 14 points?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's kind of tough to kind of pinpoint what exactly the issue is. I think you have a few issues. Number one, just is the injury component.
Yeah.
When you're down to that, when you're down to a safety playing running back, that's no good. They've also had some offensive line issues. They're finally healthier there, but their star offensive lineman Branson Bragg missed the entire season due to concussions, and he medically retired because of that.
Mhm.
And then just the injuries against Washington State were kind of crazy. So, injuries has been a problem. And then too, just in general, this is kind of a fragile team. They're coming off a 3-9 season. So these are guys that are not used to winning. It's been a while since they've been a part of a winning program. And it's just hard, I think, for guys to figure out how to win and navigate these kind of challenges when you haven't done it in a while. Um, you know, so yeah, I mean those are kind of the main kind of challenges. And then also too, there's certain guys that you would like to get a little bit more out of as well.
Mhm.
Kyle Blue Kelly came in as like the top defensive player on the entire team, first team all Pac-12. He's kind of had a quiet season. Jonathan McGill has had kind of a quiet season. He did get a Pac-12 Player of the Week award defensively against
Nice.
for the Notre Dame game. So he's had some moments, but there's also some guys that you like to see more out of. But the encouraging thing for them is, especially on the defensive side, is they've got some really talented freshmen that are starting to come on, in David Bailey and RJ Cooper, and some other guys. So I mean, there's definitely the cupboard isn't totally bare there defensively.
Yeah.
But when you got some kind of youth and experience in defense, and then you just get so depleted on offense, it becomes tough.
How do you feel about this Stanford team going to Utah at this moment? I feel like Utah's going to cover this game. I feel like they're going to cover that 24-point line. How do you feel like they'll
Mhm.
respond after a really tough loss at home against Washington State?
Yeah. So the way I phrased it to our subscribers is I said in my recap, you can read the recap from the Washington State game. I said I expect Utah to get rocked like a hurricane. I expect Stanford to get rocked
Oh,
like
there
a
you go. I was gonna
hurricane.
say, I thought you were making a joke. There you go. I thought you were.
No. I said I expect Stanford to get rocked like a hurricane at Utah. But for 24 to 72 hours a year, a female panda is capable of conceiving a cub once a year. So, I mean, so,
That's a good point. That's a good point. I like that. I've never heard
so
that before. That's a good one.
yeah. So, it's possible that you never know. But I fully expect to win this game, and I would expect them to cover.
Yeah.
It's just kind of obvious, right? I think especially after the way Utah went in there to Stanford and just slaughtered them. So there's absolutely like no
Yeah.
reason to think Stanford's going to make this game even remotely close. But that said, as I said with the panda analogy, you never know. Things do happen that are weird, and um, you know, um, I would say this too. There have been a couple of times where Stanford has won game people really didn't think they would win. No one thought they'd win that Notre Dame game. They were
Yeah.
underdogs by like
Right.
17 points, and they won that game. And nobody thought they would beat Oregon a year ago at home when they won that game. So I mean, they do occasionally seem to rise to the challenge. And I also know too that this is a game that they've kind of had circled on their calendars the
Yeah,
entire
because of
year.
last year, as you mentioned,
Because
those
of
3
last
running
year.
backs going over 100 yards. Crazy.
So I think the best hope for Stanford is that kind of two things: that they keep it close, that maybe they cover the spread, maybe they lose by 17 or something. They still lose, but it's not a complete blowout. And then I think the real key for Stanford in this game, not to say don't try to win, because I mean you got to win every game you can. You got to try to win every game you can. But I think the bigger thing for Stanford, honestly, is to just make sure they don't come out of Utah even more roughed up.
True.
Because the next game is against Cal at Berkeley, and that's a winnable game. And then BYU's been kind of up and down. So
Yeah,
there's a
very
chance for them to win their final 2 games of the year. But if they get roughed up at Utah, that could really affect those other 2 games. So I think the bigger key for them is just come out here, don't get slaughtered, and come away unscathed. And anybody going into this game that's like 50-50 health-wise that can maybe use another week, I would treat this as a bye week for those guys and just make sure they're healthy for Cal. So
Makes a lot of sense, as you mentioned. And if anything else, if you guys take anything away from this segment, don't forget Panda Facts. That's where we bring Ben Parker on, coming at you for.
Yeah, hey, it's tough for them. So
Yeah. We're going to talk about some of the matchups that kind of are intriguing in this game in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about Underdog Fantasy. This episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to spice up college football this season. Guys, Underdog is super easy to get set up, downloaded. Then you just got to see if you think players are going to go higher or lower in their total. So if you think Cam's in for a big bounce back game, make sure you go higher in that regard. If you think Bryce Young is in for a nice bounce back game against Ole Miss, make sure you go higher in his passing yards. And that's what's nice about Underdog Fantasy. You can mix and match different players to fill your lineup and get in on the action. Guys, Underdog Fantasy allows you to pick between 2 and 5 players across any team. They're available in over 30 states, including here in Utah, not just the Utes. Decide if they will finish higher or lower. One of the easiest fantasy games to play out there, and you can win cold hard cash in a single game. Sign up with promo code Locked On. That's once again one word, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Once again, that's promo code Locked On, one word, to double your first deposit up to $100. Deposit 100, get a free 100. Go to underdog.com or find the Underdog app in App Store and Google Play Store. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code Locked On, one word. Get in on the college football pickup action today. So, Ben, coming back into this one, talk about the matchups that make this one exciting. For me, I'm curious about, as you mentioned, the Stanford offensive line against a Utah pass rush, a Stanford offensive line that struggled last week against the Washington State pass rush, gave up some pressure on McKee in this one. I'm looking then at this Utah pass rush, a unit that struggled for a lot of the year to get home with just 4. They're missing Van Fillinger for the second straight game. I'm excited to see what the Utes defensive line can do, if they can get pressure with 4 or if they're going to have to continue to blitz in order to get that pressure. And how do you think this one's going to shake out? Because I do feel like the Utes are going to be able to get another 3-sack performance in this one, but I think it'll be another example of there's going to be some plays McKee has a little bit of time, and there's going to be some plays where the Utes are able to get home. I think we're going to see a little bit of both in this one.
yeah, I would agree. I think that's a good matchup for sure to keep an eye on. The one thing, as I said, going into this one that David Shaw did mention this week was he felt the offensive line is healthier for them than it's been in recent weeks. They got more guys back, and guys have gotten more experience. So I do think how the offensive line does for Stanford against the Utah pass rush is definitely going to be an interesting matchup to see. And I would flip it as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Stanford's pass rush
Yeah.
does against Utah's offensive line, because that's been kind of the one. That's been kind of a bright spot for Stanford at times. Has been their pass rush. I mentioned David Bailey. I mentioned R.G. Cooper. They got a senior, Stephen Herron, on the outside edge as well. They got some good edge rushers
Yeah, Heron, 5.5 sacks.
that are capable. Yeah, they got guys on the edge that can bring the heat too. So I think pass rush is going to be big on both sides. But the difference there is, to Utah's advantage, is that Cameron Rising is much more mobile than Tanner McKee is. McKee is not as mobile. So one thing that I would be interested to see too, kind of going off that, is how Stanford uses their freshman quarterback Ashton Daniels this week, because he's much more of a mobile runner type, kind of cut out more out of the Tim Tebow cloth, where he's more of a dual threat kind of running quarterback. And those guys sometimes tend to do better against the pass rush. So I think that, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how McKee does. But I'm also curious to see how Stanford utilizes Ashton Daniels, because I mentioned how the running game is so depleted. They've been looking at using Ashton a bit as a running back, or or put him out there with McKee at times. So that's going to be something to look for, as well as how Stanford uses Ashton, because they're going to need him to do some things for them in the ground game, because they really don't have any real good runners outside.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up on the other side of the ball too. This is the Utah offensive line that had a lot of new players coming in, a couple new guys playing new positions. They've come together pretty well as of late. They were good against Arizona, gave up the lone sack, but outside of that, did a good job keeping Cam Rising clean. Right side of the offensive line's been a little bit of an issue, but Satao Laumea, their first-year right tackle, who started at right guard for them the past 2 seasons, has really started to settle in over there. Michael Mokafisi feels like he's getting more comfortable, and even if Paul Miley, their starting center, doesn't play, Johnny Maea, who started last week, had a good game. So it's going to be fun, because this is a Stanford team capable of getting after the quarterback a little bit, and be interesting to see if they're capable of doing it once again in fun fashion. So flipping it over to the other side of the ball, then that matchup that intrigues me is that we mentioned that Stanford front. I'm just talking about the pass rush for that Stanford defensive line versus the Utes. But I'm curious about this Utah running game, because on the season, if you look at it overall, Stanford isn't giving up the 300 yards on the ground they gave up last year to Utah, or against even last week to Washington State. They're only giving up 215 on the season. So I think the interesting thing then is, does that continue against Utah? You look at the Stanford team, and look, Utah wants to run the ball. We said we don't know what Cam Rising's health is going to look like exactly. I do feel like the Utes have another productive rushing day. I don't know if they'll go for over 300 in this one, because I don't feel like the game will be super close, because like we mentioned, it'll be 24. So I don't know if there's as much of a need to. I think some of those runs, you'll get some of the backups in late. So it'll be those short 5-yard runs that just kind of kill the clock. But I do expect the Utes to be very productive on the ground. And I do think Tavion Thomas will go over 100 yards again, something that he hasn't done in a while, because he's been dealing with a couple things off the field, was away from the team against the Washington State game. So I do feel like the Utes will have success on the ground and be able to get some more confidence in the ground game. But I don't know if it'll be as productive as last year, because look, it's just hard to predict 3 guys to go for over 100 yards again.
Yeah, no, and I think for Stanford, I think that's got to be goal number one here, is stopping the run. And I mean, a reason why they regressed last week against Washington State was because on that first drive, those 4 guys went down. Kendall Williamson went down. Levani DeMooney went down. Ricky Miezon went down. And one other guy went down. I mean, so that was hard for them to adjust. It was hard for those guys to adjust to that. But they have been doing better stopping the run this year defensively. They have been better. And if they can get some of those guys back, like I said, maybe wait for big game if needed against Cal. That's more important at this point. But yeah, they've been doing better in that department. Guys have been filling their gaps better. Guys have been hitting harder. So, yeah, I would agree with you. I would be surprised if Utah runs on them to the same degree as last year.
Yeah.
But still, if I'm Utah, the first thing I do is I just test that run defense and just say, okay, prove to us that you're in fact better than you were last year.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's going to be interesting to see if Utah can prove that in the running department, which they're not as strong as they were last year. So we'll have to watch and see what they're capable of in this one. We're going to come back and wrap up with one last intriguing matchup for this game. But first, I want to talk to you guys about UCCU. Guys, as you know, interest rates are on and inflation are on the rise. So UCCU is here to help. They're offering a 15-month savings certificate with an incredibly high APY of 4.00%. Plus, you can jump up to an even higher rate of return anytime during the life of your certificate. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but interest rates and inflation, as I mentioned, they're on the rise. So there's some good news. UCCU can help you use this current rise in rates to your advantage. For a limited time, UCCU is offering a 15-month savings certificate with an incredibly high APY of 4.00%. What's the savings certificate? Is that like a savings account? Yes, a savings certificate is similar to a savings account. Both are great ways to earn a safe return on your money over time. But here's the difference. Savings accounts typically come with unlimited deposits and withdrawals, but a savings certificate, you just make one deposit and then let your money grow and grow and grow and grow with a fixed rate of return that's a much higher than a standard saving account. How much higher? Let's just say a lot higher. Visit uccu.com to learn more or get a savings certificate today. UCCU is here for you guys to help you guys out. And remember, for a limited time, they're offering that 15-month savings certificate with an incredibly high APY of 4.00% and a variety of terms and options to match your specific needs. Visit ucccu.com today to learn more and get a savings certificate today. Love where you bank, UCCU. Also, want to talk to you guys about SimpliSafe. Did you know that over the holidays, property crimes like burglaries and package thefts spike nationally? That's why our friends at SimpliSafe Home Security are offering 50% of their award-winning security system so that more families can feel safe and secure this holiday season. Or your SimpliSafe system for half off today and enjoy advanced security and a greater peace of mind this holiday season. Guys, I love SimpliSafe because just simply reliable and there whenever you need it. An emergency 24/7 professional monitoring agency use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get a priority police response. That 24/7 professional monitoring service costs less than $1 a day, less than half the price of ADT's traditional professionally installed system. So with the top rated SimpliSafe apps stay in complete control of your system anytime, anywhere. Arm or disarm, unlock for a guest, access your cameras, or adjust your system settings. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/URL today. This is your biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/LockedOnCollege. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. So coming back in with Ben. Ben, we lost you there for a second, but we're able to get you back in. Appreciate you being ready to go on your toes. And any other matchups that you think are going to be interesting to see, or maybe some of those younger players, as you mentioned, for Stanford that could potentially play in this one that you want to see how they're going to hold up against some of the veterans of Utah, a team that did return 17 starters coming into this year?
Yeah, so before I cut out, hopefully you got the part that I think if I'm Utah, I start with testing the Stanford run. That's what I was trying to say before I cut
Yeah.
off. Is test that run and test that run defense and say, okay, prove to us that you're better in that department than last year. Because that's been the problem for them all year. Well, that was a big problem from last year, and it's still a bit of a weak spot. I mean, as far as like other things to look for, I mean, I guess one other thing too is going to be special teams. Probably the best player in Stanford's team is their kicker, Joshua Carty. He's been huge. And you got to talk about him. You know, the Arizona State game was all field goals. He made all 5 of his field goals. And was just absolutely clutch in that one. So, yeah, I would look at Joshua Carty, the matchup with Carty as a big one.
Looks like we lost Ben again, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get him back. But until he does come back, look, as you mentioned, when it comes to Utah in this game, I feel like the Utes are going to roll. They're going to be able to get the win. So all these matchups in terms of what we're talking about, it's just how intriguing are they to make it's a nice opportunity for Stanford to get a little bit of that experience. And then as well as those guys, just the opportunity on special teams, as you were talking about, Ben, before we lost you again, having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues at the moment.
Yeah.
It just feels like a nice opportunity for the Stanford team to get some of that experience against a good team, especially for those younger players.
Yeah. And you know, Carty, like I said, you know, he's such a weapon for them. Stanford can't just do field goals the entire time; they got to get in the end zone.
Yeah.
But if they could get in the end zone a couple times, then I mean, the Josh Carty factor could be interesting. He's really, really, really good. You know, yeah, he might be their best NFL prospect on the entire team. He's that good of a kicker. So, how they use him will be interesting to see. Obviously, they got to find that end zone, but. Josh Carty's a guy to talk about because you know Stanford's a team where if they get in field goal range, unless they turn the ball over, it's a guaranteed 3 points from at a minimum. So I guess I would say one other thing for Stanford is going to be ball security. That was a big issue. That was horrible last week. And there were guys that were fumbling the balls that shouldn't be fumbling balls. I understand Mitch Lakeber, the running back, fumbling it. He's not used to playing that position. I get why he would have some troubles with it, but I mean, you know, junior tight end Benjamin Urasic, senior wide receiver Elijah Higgins, those guys got to take care of the ball. So I think ball security is going to be big. So if Stanford can find the end zone a couple times and secure the ball, hang on to it, and make sure that worst case scenario, if they get across the 50, they at least get a field goal, that will allow them to at least avoid like a huge blowout.
What do you think about Tanner McKee? I think that was the guy a lot of people coming in this year were looking at like, wait, NFL prospect, we'll see what he can do. And it's been really quiet on that front. So how much of Stanford's issues this year do you think fall at McKee? And do you think he's a guy who is capable of playing elite ball at the next level? And I should even ask this, do you hope he comes back for next year?
I think Stanford definitely hopes he comes back for next year. I think that he's their best option for next year at quarterback. I think part of his problem has been the fact that the offensive line has not been what they thought it would be. Losing Bragg for the entire year was tough. And there's been a lot of guys in and out of that rotation. So it's hard for him to get into a groove. Offensive line is shaky, and then he hasn't had a real running game to work with all season long. And then his favorite receiver, Michael Wilson's out for maybe he comes back, but it's likely out for the year. So I think he's done about as well as he can be expected to do given the circumstances. But as I was saying, he's not the most mobile quarterback in the world. And as far as NFL prospects are concerned, I think he could benefit from another year of college ball before he goes to NFL. That's kind of my feeling. I definitely think he's done as well as he can be expected to do. But there are certain limitations he has just in terms of mobility. And he's still a pretty young quarterback in terms of last year was his first time as a starter. And this is really his first time coming into a season knowing he's gonna be the starter. So
Sure.
I definitely think they could use another year with him. And then the other quarterback, Ashton Daniels, they got a bright future. So I think they hope in that they can figure out a way to use both McKee and Daniels for next year.
And let's say those guys come back. What else does Stanford need to do? It's not going to be a 1-year turnaround, but what does Stanford need to do to get back in the thick of this race? As a team who, with Christian McCaffrey, Bryce Love, you mentioned just not so long ago, was in the contention for college football playoff spots. We're battling for Pac-12 titles and winning them too. What do they need to do to get back there?
Well, you mentioned those names, Bryce Love and Christian McCaffrey. Those were two elite running backs. And if you kind of look at the fall of Stanford football from that era to now, the big difference is that this current Stanford team does not have an elite running back right now. They don't
Yeah.
have one, and they need to get one. And their hope is that EJ Smith could be that for them. But we don't know yet because he missed the entire year this year, basically. So he's redshirting and will have 2 more years. So I think it starts with EJ. They need EJ Smith to be better than any of us thought he would be. And so if he becomes the elite running back that they think he's capable of being, and that offensive line develops and gets better and stabilizes, I think that more than anything would change things for them because I actually think defensively they're getting better. I mentioned those young freshmen they got up from with Cooper and Bailey. Those guys are going to be good. So I think it really comes down to whether or not EJ Smith can be the guy at running back. And maybe he will. I mean, a guy who I think he kind of reminds me of, I don't think he's Christian McCaffrey level, but a guy who played across the bay or in the South Bay at San Jose State, a guy named Tyler Irvin. I'm not sure if you remember that name or not, but he missed his entire junior year at San Jose State, had 1 touch, missed the entire junior year. He's like a 5'10", a little smaller than EJ, but similar in terms of being a guy that was kind of an all-purpose back, that could return kicks, be a receiver, kind of like McCaffrey, kind of like a B-grade Christian McCaffrey. After missing his entire junior season, Tyler Irvin just dominated at San Jose State, had a really strong redshirt junior year, and then really exploded in his redshirt senior year, his 5th year at San Jose State, and ended up being the 4th-round selection in the NFL draft for the Houston Texans. So that's a guy who I think EJ Smith could end up being. It's not. I don't think he's the next Christian McCaffrey, but it could be the next Tyler Irvin. And Tyler Irvin was pretty good. So that's a guy. What they need. I think is they need him to really explode. And then also too, just in general, the defense needs to just get better and everything. So I think that's really the biggest key is they're missing that elite running back. So
Be interesting to see if they can get it turned around in all those regards. It'll be interesting to see if it's David Shaw at the helm who does it, or if the Cardinal do opt to make a change in their department. Personally, I might think about a change. I think sometimes a message just wears stale and you've been there so long. But look, Coach Shaw has done so much for this team. Could definitely argue he deserves another opportunity to see what he can do with them. Either way, it's going to be an interesting offseason for Stanford on, look, this Saturday, what should be dominated by the Utes. But Ben, what did the Panda do? What about Pandas again?
Well, for 24 to 72 hours once a year, a
Yes.
female panda is capable of conceiving a cub.
Yes.
So
so anything is possible. Appreciate you, Ben, for joining us. Make sure you guys check out rivals.com, Stanford for Ben's coverage at SlamDunk406 on Twitter. Ben, it was great having you on. Appreciate you.
Anytime, JT. Thank you so much.
Make sure you guys, for your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports today for the best stories in sports, the biggest stories, the take of the day. Locked On Sports has you covered daily with lots of great content. Check them out today. And we will be back with you tomorrow on Locked On Utes. But thank you for listening today.